Hey everyone, Kale with the Antique Book Collective, and today I'm getting to you guys with the ultimate small town side hustle, antique books. So obviously, I am an antique book seller. I have been doing this for several years now, and I do it almost exclusively on eBay. I would say it's exclusive to the antique book side of things, and as of now, it's exclusively eBay, but it didn't start out that way. I have found my way into this, and the way I found my way into this was actually by going to small towns and getting all the books I could from small towns. So, with that out of the way, let me just talk about antique book businesses in general really quick. So, what do I do? So, I buy antique books for the lowest possible price I can. The way I do that is I go to Friends of the Library book sales, which are really common in small towns. So, the larger towns I have found don't do it nearly as often as small towns do it. I have found small towns do it like some of them do it monthly, some of them do it weekly, some of them have ongoing ones, some of them do it several times a year, whereas the large towns, like larger cities, I find they do it like one huge big bonanza and like thousands of people show up and you get like 3 books because there's too many people to buy any books. Whereas the small town ones, I mean, there's so many books and there's so few of people getting them, so it's really an awesome thing. So I just found my way into this particular business, and ever since I found out about it being so good in small towns, I've just gotten so excited about it, and I've got actually a wish list of all these small towns I'd like to buy houses in and whatnot. Or I'm only going to have one house that I'll live in, but just I've been looking at all these other towns because I'm like, ooh, this would be central for if I want to hit these different estate sales and all these different Friends of the Library sales. Like, I have literally been looking at houses based on the small towns around them because of my antique book business, because that's how much money I've been making on this antique book business. Is it's enough that I actually would think to build my life around it. So in my first few months of having a book business, so I did 4 months of it. So I started in September and I went till December for my very first year, and I got $50K in that time of revenue. Now, of course, that was just top line revenue. There was a lot of expenses to that. Most of those expenses were because I did Amazon FBA at the time. I have since cut the Amazon FBA because that just was taking too much money. So I've just started doing just eBay. I've actually brought my mom on because she liked how much money I was making on it. And I have made really, really good money on eBay. I make hundreds of dollars a month on a bad month, and on good months, I've made tens of thousands of dollars profit at the end of the day. And yes, those are really good numbers. The bad numbers, still being hundreds of dollars, is not very bad. Now, I will admit, over the past year or so, I have not been making those numbers for sales because of government lockdowns. They just absolutely murdered my business. I wish I lived in small towns because the small towns weren't as heavily regulated, but because of the heavy regulations where I live, I wasn't really able to do anything because all the places that I'd normally hit were all closed down, and I just didn't have the time to go out and drive to the small towns because I was busy working on other different side hustles that I have. So with that said, I am finally getting back into the eBay antique book business a lot more, and because of that, I am able to be ramping up my money and my revenue back to what it used to be. I am expecting to be back where I used to be in short order. Of course, I will have to be doing a lot of work sourcing books and listing books to get back to that, but it is definitely something that's not very hard to do. So with that said, that's my revenue potential. That is not guaranteeing that's how much you guys will make, but it is definitely a potential of what you guys could be making. You could be making full-time incomes. Like, as I said, I did $50K in just 4 months of revenue. So, I mean, think about that in eBay terms. So for me, I make at least I think it's like 60% profit on what I sell on eBay. So let's just grab a calculator. Sorry. So 50K. So again, that was just for 4 months, but 50K, if I made 60% of that in revenue on eBay, that'd be $30,000 in just 4 months. Let's just annualize that. So that's times 3. So that'd be $90,000 profit a year. That's pretty good money, especially if you're living in a small town, because small towns are normally in rural areas, and rural areas have lower minimum wages, so that whole sort of thing. So you'd actually be able to make some really, really good money just based off the numbers that I have done myself. And that's another reason why I've been looking at those small towns, is because it's like, well, if I can make that much and live in a small town where I'd rather live than in the city, consider it done. So with that said and done, that is definitely something that could happen for you guys. You could make more. You could be making less. It really depends. I'm not guaranteeing anything because it really depends on how much work you guys put in. And on top of that, it also depends on what kind of books are around you. So if you live in certain areas, there might not be as many antique books out there around you. There might be not as valuable of antique books around you. For me, my bread and butter of books is like $60 to $80-ish is like my sweet spot of where I sell a ton of books. I sell a lot in the like $35 to $50 range. But I have had some books that are like $1,000 or more for when I sell them. But for you guys, you might have your sweet spot be somewhere else on what you make. You might have it on the higher end, you might have it on the lower end. It really varies on where, what part of the world you're from, which I think is really cool, really interesting. And on top of that, for me, everywhere I live, I'm spending around $2 for books. If I drive out to the sticks, I can pay like $1 for a book. If I drive out past the sticks in the desert, because I live in Oregon, so like we have a big chunk of desert, when I go all the way out there, I can get even better deals on these books. So it really varies on where you live. So if I just stuck where I live, I mean, I'd be paying between $2 and $15 for books, or maybe even more. Whereas if I lived all the way out there, I could be averaging like just 50 cents a book. Or I actually know of different eBay sellers and booksellers in general who are buying books for like 5 cents. Imagine how much money you can make if you're buying books for 5 cents instead of what I'm doing for $2. That could really get you guys a lot of revenue. So that is definitely something you guys want to keep in mind when you are doing your business. So there is a little caveat though, talking about that whole sort of thing, is when I am buying my books, I depend on having either cell data or Wi-Fi connection to be able to look up these books as I'm doing them. There are some books that I can just grab because I recognize them and I know I can make money, but there are other ones that I'm looking at and I'm like, I think I can make money, I'm not sure, should I do this? And when I have that, I will be looking them up on my eBay app on my phone. All I do when I'm typing those books in to look them up is I just type in the year. So let's say I find a book from 1847, so I'll type in 1847 and then I'll type in the title. Oftentimes that'll have the book pop up exactly what you want, and you'll be able to find comps. Comps are other items, comparable items to yours that you can draw your price from. So I like to get books that have comps that are at least $35 at my floor. Sometimes I fudge the numbers and I go down to like 25, but by and large I like to have 35 be my hard floor. And if you guys are going to do it like me, that is how you'll do it. But there are lots of people who have lots of money that they make on selling books that are just like $5. They will get more sales than I do because I'm selling the more premium books. But book for book, I actually make more profit than their $5 books. So that's definitely something you guys want to keep in mind. I wouldn't recommend that you guys start all antique books or all $5 books. I would recommend you guys start out with just a spread of all the books that you know you can make some money on. Like, I don't care if you're getting $1 profit on a book. If it's worth the dollar profit for you guys, I'd recommend doing it because you can find out if that can be a good niche for you where you live. So every small town, every region of the US is very different. There are some places that I go to just to buy sets of books. There are some places I go to around me just to buy antique books. There are a lot of different places that I go to, different regions, different sections of my state, of the coast I live on. I go all the way up to like Seattle, all the way down to Redding, California, all the way over almost to Idaho. That's a lot of driving for me, but I do it because I know I can get a good variety of books. And that is something you guys might want to do if you live in a small town. You probably are willing to do a lot more driving than big town people, because big cities people, they're like, oh, I'm not going to drive 5 hours to go somewhere. Whereas small town people are like, 5 hours? Oh, that's easy. I could do that in my sleep. So that's definitely another thing. And with that said and done, there is another amazing thing that I've already glossed over a little bit for why I love the antique book business for small town people. And that is because the competition is just so incredibly low. So for me, I live near Portland. Ugh. Portland, the worst, but seriously, it's horrible. I don't even go into Portland because it's so bad so much of the time. But I live around Portland, and for me, there's a lot of competition when I go too close to Portland. So that's another reason why I don't like going to Portland, is there's so much competition besides them just being jerks there. So I like to go out to the more rural areas, and the reason for that is there are less buyers for books in general, but there's also less resellers, like other book resellers who will go and buy books to resell themselves online. So when I go to these small towns, I'm the only person that's buying in order to resell. All these other people, they're buying books because they want to read that book. Whereas for me, I'm buying these books because, yes, I want to read a couple of them, but I'll be selling them off in the future. And because of that, I don't have to worry about competition when I'm grabbing all these different books. And I can know when I'm looking at a shelf of books, I'm like, all right, no one has ever gone through these books that is looking to resell these books. So I know that I can check all of them to see which ones are valuable. Whereas if you are like me and you go towards Portland and there's like 500 other people selling books that have already gone through the sale, you know, when you look at the shelf that they've already gone through, you're like, oh, I'm not going to that shelf. There's nothing left on that shelf for me to make money on. Whereas, as I was saying, when I go to the rural areas, all the small towns, I look at a shelf, I'm like, this thing is like virgin ground. I'm going to find the mother lode. I'm going to be rich. I'm so excited. And I have found a lot of the best sales I've done are all, sorry, a lot of the best purchases I've done have all been in the more small towns that don't have all the other buyers and sellers taking everything and trying to resell it themselves, and a lot of times they don't even know what they're looking at, so they end up throwing away some amazing books, which is really a bummer. But that being said, I do always find some good gems in these places, even near Portland, because I actually know what I'm doing, whereas a lot of these people are just grabbing stuff they think is good. But I've been doing this for several years now, so I actually sort of know what I'm looking for, and I'm always able to get at least a couple books that are worth it. So with that said and done, on to what I was saying earlier about how drive time is definitely an impact for people that are buying and selling books. So for me, I don't mind driving whatsoever. So for me, the thought of driving 8 hours to go to a different book sale is like, all right, 8 hours there, 8 hours back. I'll probably spend the night there though, because that's a lot of driving. And if I do this and this and this, I'll just run the numbers and, oh, that sounds like a really cool opportunity. And I like just going on drives in general. So it's like, yeah, this is the best thing ever. But as I was saying earlier, people that live in cities, they think 8 hours. Why would I ever want to drive 8 hours to go to something? I only have to drive 5 minutes to go to work. And, well, when I get my coffee, my $80 coffee, well, that makes it a 10-minute drive to work. So why would I ever drive 8 hours somewhere? Like, they don't like driving as much. I don't know why. Like, it's so much fun to go for a drive. But people who live in, like, more rural areas, they're so used to driving long distances because that's just the way of life for them. Like, they have to drive X many hours to go to the nearest Costco or something, you know, to get their bulk items. So that's something that is really a benefit to people that live in small towns, is the fact that they're not scared of driving. So for me, as I was saying earlier, I live outside of Portland, and I almost never have, actually, now that I think about it, I don't know if I've ever had a Portlander actually come to my side of town to resell books, like buy books to resell. That's actually a funny thought. I've never actually thought about that. But for me, like, as soon as I go towards Portland, like within a 10-minute drive of where these people live, there's tons of them. But as soon as I go just a few miles more, where it's just like, I don't know, another half-hour driving for them, they're like never there. So that's another thing, is because they're not there, it's a really good opportunity for you guys and for me, because there's less competition, and to think that I can drive all this way and not have any competition whatsoever is a really cool thing. And you guys will likely have the same exact situation. Like you might have, because there are a lot of very capitalistic, awesome people out in small towns that are willing to do stuff for, like, put in good work to get good money. You probably will have a couple of other people that are reselling books depending on where you live. Like you might have a couple and you might become friends with them. You might be like, hey, I'll focus on these books, you focus on those, and you might make a good partnership in the long run. That could be really cool for you guys. But by and large, I would say a lot of you guys probably won't find anyone that's also buying and selling books, because it's just a really rare business to get into, especially when you're doing rare books like me, like I do rare antique books. It's like, there's no one else selling what I'm selling around me. Even when I go towards Portland, there's no one else doing exactly what I'm doing. So as I was saying earlier, my competition's there for books in general, but for my books that I look for, I'm still able to find plenty of gems because I'm the only one selling really what I'm selling. So it's interesting. So with that said, let me just, so as I was saying, you guys do the long drives to go to the store. And this is actually a really cool opportunity for you, is because if you're driving, so I had family that lived in Burns and they drive all the way to Bend, which is a pretty substantial drive. But if I was to do that, I would wrap my Costco trip to go to Bend, I would wrap my Costco trip into going to a couple of estate sales and different Friends of the Library sales on my way from Burns, because that's something you guys can do. I mean, you're already putting in all that drive time, so you might as well hit these places along the way to get your stuff that can get you some really good money, and odds are you'd probably be able to pay off your Costco trip just by the stuff you can pick up, because there are several, I'm saying this from memory because I've actually gone to a lot of these sales, there are several sales that happen somewhere around Bend and a couple around Burns and a couple along the way, so there are definitely places you can hit along the way, even though if you guys have ever been to like Central and Eastern Oregon, it's pretty sparsely populated, but there are still some amazing things that you can hit. And with that being said, I would personally, if I lived in Burns and was going to Bend to get to Costco and all the other things, I would be hitting all these different things. I would be timing my trips. So instead of going whatever day I was going to go, I would time it. So for me, I would go on, I think it's the second or the third Saturday, because there is a city called Prineville sort of along the way that I would hit, because they have an amazing book sale that I go to whenever I can. And because I'd be able to do that, I'd be able to get some really good money at that Prineville, and then I'd be able to basically pay off my Costco trip, which is a pretty cool idea. So with that said, There is also, as I mentioned earlier, the very low cost of books in rural areas. On top of that, it's not just the low cost of books, but there's a ton of books. So something I find interesting, and I always think it's so funny, is the people that live in big cities are always like, oh, those country bumpkins don't know anything. They can't even read. But what I find is probably the exact opposite. So when I go to estate sales and different types of sales in the more urban areas, someone's going to own books and they're going to own like 50 books. Whereas when I go to the more rustic rural areas, when there's someone that reads, they're going to have tens of thousands of books. And I'm just going to be like, whoa, this person read a ton. Like, because people that live in small towns don't have to go and do all the weird big town hustly things, they have time to read, they have time to learn, and they have time to accumulate a lot of books. And when they have a lot of books, for us resellers, people like me, when we go in there, we know that there's a lot of money for us to be made for us. And on top of that, we also know that the person that had all those books was a pretty stinking cool person, because anyone that's a reader knows for a fact that other readers are really cool people in general, because they just really seem a lot more educated and wise of the world. I don't know why. That's just sort of the way it happens, and it's really cool when you meet other readers. So with all that said, because there's so many books, there's oftentimes so many books that the people don't really worry about how much they're selling them for. So when I go to the really rural areas where the person has a ton of books, I go to some of these and they're like, oh yeah, we don't know what these are worth, so what do you think they're worth? And I get to name my price. Or they'll be like, yeah, 50 cents a book. And it's like, well, I could do 50 cents. Sometimes I go to some and they're like, oh, $5 a book. I'm like, well, in Portland, we pay like $2, so can I do $2? I'm like, sure, I'm fine. Whatever sells. I mean, take them all. It's like, okay. You could definitely negotiate a lot easier as well, because people just, it's a lot easier going in the small towns. So you can definitely negotiate and get even better prices than the already good prices you're probably going to find. So with all that said and done, antique books, reselling in general, but both mostly for antique books and books in general. But again, anything you guys can find in your rural areas, you're probably going to have really good luck reselling. There is a couple caveats to that. One quick caveat would be local pickup is a thing that you can do on eBay. I've done quite a few local pickup things, so it might not be as easy to do if you live in a small town. But besides that, the entire reselling business online is like absolutely insane and really profitable if you live in a small town, because there's just so few of people doing it out there, and there's so many things you can get. And because there's so few of people doing it and so much to have, you can get some really good prices when you're buying all these different things, taking them in, and also you can store them pretty cheap compared to what you can do like in California. The storage is absolutely insane. Whereas if you live in rural areas, you can store them on your own property in a couple storage containers. It's really easy, really cheap. So the cost of business, basically, guys, if you live in a small town, is like, instead of being up here for a city, it's like down here. So your profit margins are just through the roof. So that all being said, the entire side hustle of reselling online, particularly reselling antique books on eBay, is like a must do, or at least a must check out if you live in a small town. So if you guys would like to learn more about reselling books on eBay, or basically just eBay businesses in general, be sure to subscribe below. I'd love to have you guys follow me. You can check out one of my other videos, or you can hit that little thing up there to subscribe as well. And I will see you guys in the next video.